Good morning, North America. Welcome to Church Talk TV. Lively talk about life, church, and church life. I'm your co-host, Dr. Bill Tenney-Britton, and I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host, Dr. Chris Tenney-Britton, and we're broadcasting from our studio in Columbia, Missouri, the heartland of America. Say good morning, Chris.
Well, good morning, and welcome to Church Talk TV.
Chris and Bill Tenney-Britton here today to do the offering plate shuffle.
Yeehaw!
A dance to generous giving. Hey, see, we can dance. All right, we ought to be on TikTok.
Not really. Yeah, we could do that, huh? No,
Yeah,
let's not.
let's not. Let's say we
Okay,
did.
yeah, so we do want to talk about how your congregation can be generous in its giving. Now, notice, though, we are talking about generosity, not raising your offerings, although the two do go hand in hand.
Well, we aren't talking about raising your offerings, to be fair.
Well, I said the two go hand in hand.
Yeah, but we're not talking about fundraising. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about people who donate. And the reality is that if everyone in your congregation actually tithed, which is an Old Testament concept, mentioned in the New Testament, Jesus didn't say he wanted the tithe. He said he wanted it all, which makes the tithe pretty darn cheap when you think about it.
It does.
But in any event, that we're not. If everyone tithed, you probably wouldn't have a lot of money problems. And here's what happened, and what really inspired this particular episode is that just 2 weeks ago, I was having a conversation with one of my catalytic pastors in the Growing Church Network, and he said, "We don't have money problems anymore." And I thought, wow. Well, that was pretty awesome. And he doesn't have money problems anymore for a number of reasons. Number one, the church is growing. Number two is he's put together almost everything we're going to talk about in this episode. So, this stuff works. So,
well, I do want to say this, so that churches that are doing anything do tend to have money problems, if you will. But those problems are such that there's never enough money to do all the ministry that you want to do.
That's absolutely
it's
true.
Not right. I mean, it's not about not being able to pay your bills, not being able to pay your pastor or staff or anything else. It's that, wow, you're seeing all this ministry and the funds aren't there.
Right.
Right.
But
okay,
what we know about is that in this post-COVID world, and especially with the smaller, mid-sized churches, there's a huge money crunch right now. Giving for charity across the United States, everything I read says it's up. But not so much for the church. The church used to be the number one receiver. I think it still is. Gets the majority of gifts. But the percentage of that has dropped significantly. So we want to talk about how to deal with that.
Well, okay, so I find interesting, we talk about charities and schools, right? But what churches, we do charity. I mean, we're not seen as a charity. I think that plays in there.
That's not true, actually. We're considered charitable giving in the larger scope.
Right, but people's heads,
right,
that's
exactly.
what I'm talking about,
there.
right?
No argument there.
And the other piece I wanted to go back to real quick, you said something about fundraising. And a lot of our churches do apply, maybe your church apply giving in a way that you're talking about fundraising, like we have fundraisers, but basically that's what we're doing on Sunday mornings, right? We're going to pass the offering basket. The only difference between that and a fundraiser is nobody's getting anything for it, or at least,
well, okay.
Right, really? But, I just saw this in a minister's bulletin not too long ago. Hey, remember that, your gifts do matter. They keep the lights on, they pay our salaries and blah, blah, blah. And that's true. And people would say, yeah, that happens, but they weren't inspired by that. Okay, well, let's keep moving.
So we're talking about inspirational giving is what we're really talking about. In fact, this comes out of a workbook that I created called the get more giving. No, what's it called? Anyway, the inspirational giving, so that people give because of inspiration. But let's talk about the current situation.
Wait a minute. And that notebook or that book, even though we're not remembering the exact title of it right now, is down here that you can click on it.
That's right. You can download it now. All
there
right.
It is.
So we want to start off by talking about the current giving situation and some of the problems that we're facing in our churches. And I think that's really important because, you probably know there's a problem. because there's probably a problem in your church, or otherwise you probably wouldn't be on this call. But in any event, you need to raise money, you need to have the funds coming in, et cetera. But the current giving situation is such that, well, there's a number of reasons why you're in this boat you're in. And number one is go ahead.
Go ahead. Well,
no, I was going to say is, and I was going to pause for you to jump in.
Here it is. It's that it's taboo to talk about money. I mean, we just don't do it. Because we might offend somebody, or, and some people make more money than other people do. I still remember long time later, I got a letter from a social worker, and the social worker had a client who happened to be a member in the church, and without revealing the identity of that client, said that I'd stood up in the pulpit, I had talked about tithing and how they had to tithe, and how dare I, because this person lived on
fixed income.
Substance.
Subsistence.
That's it, subsistence, and didn't have any kind of money to do that with. And I'm thinking, good night. I don't remember talking about that at all. And fortunately, at that point, I had all my notes written out, and I wrote the social worker back, and I said, listen, I could be wrong on this, but rarely do I veer, especially on such a tough topic. But that person had their own interpretation going on it, because we talked about money. And so many people are afraid to talk about it, not to mention that it's for many of us, at least our generation, I think one after us, that it was poured into our minds. You never ask somebody how much, well, even today, you never ask somebody how much they make. You never share that information or anything else.
And it also plays into, one of the reasons that this is a taboo is because we've all heard, well, the church only ever talks about money. The only thing they want is our money. And so we get gun shy about it. And, and so in many churches, and I mean a lot of churches, the only stewardship sermons you hear are somewhere around September, October, when we're putting together our annual budget. Okay. So that's one problem. Okay. And it's a huge problem. And we're going to talk about that. The second problem is the offering snooze. When I talk about the offering snooze, I'm talking about the person or persons who gets up and they go on about some offering meditation that is, it seems often in like 2 verses in scripture that talk about open the gateways of heaven and prove the tithe and blah, 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 or the Lord loves a cheerful giver, and some variation of those 2 or some other. And, we're just like, whatever. And, or else, right. So we snooze through it, and it doesn't inspire anyone to give.
Well, if it did, it'd be working. Good night. How many churches have we been in? We have been in hundreds, if not over thousands of churches. And we have seen this over the majority of churches, maybe your church, and it's not working. If it did, like you had said earlier, you wouldn't be watching this episode.
Right. Well, and I think about it. What I hear when I hear the offering meditation in most is what Charlie Brown hears when he hears an adult. Wah, 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 wah. Because we've heard it all before. It's not inspiring. So the offering snooze is a problem. The third one is the money-obsessed culture. And I can't tell you how many churches I've been a part of, have heard and had to deal with, that all they talk about is the money, or all they seem to talk about is the money. And not because they want more money per se, they need more money, but generally it's our budget. We're running out of money. We're using all our endowments. We're in the black, or sorry, we're in the red and need to get in the black. And in the board meetings,
and we can't do this. We can't do that. Right. It's about what we can't do.
Right. And the board meetings are all about money.
Oh Lord.
And the offering snooze is often about we need to give. You need to give more. Blah 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 blah. And then there's an obsession with we gotta also get all these fundraisers because we gotta figure out some other way to raise money. And when a church is all about the money, that love of money is the root of all evil. I want to say that the love of money might be the root of all kinds of evil, but what is really the root of all kinds of evil in churches is the obsession about money. Because when you obsess about money, you're not at all considering or talking about or working towards the mission critical aspects of the church of making disciples. It's all about this.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back and touch real quick about that mentioning of the board meeting. My friends, when we outline our board meetings, so often, see if this is relevant to you, or if it strikes terror in you. But you start with, you've got opening words, and then you get down to the meat of the meeting. You've got the minutes are being read, and then right up front, we do the finance report. Well, let me challenge you.
It takes the rest of the meeting primarily.
Well, but it dictates the rest of the meeting. That's what happens. Yeah, you could say it takes the rest of the meeting, but it dictates the rest of the meeting. Well, I want to challenge you to move that to the end of the meeting. I've done this before in churches in which I've served. It works amazingly because you're doing ministry. You get to the end, you hear the budget report, which could be a real low, but you're able to say, how are we going to make this happen? It's not, and you who are in leadership, pastor, work with the chair of your board. If you can't work with the chair of your finance committee, then the question becomes, we've decided we're going to do this now. How are we going to make it happen?
There's the key, folks, is that it is a different attitude. And
this
isn't on our outline, but since you've gone there, and it's great information is that never out of anyone's mouth should be, we can't afford this. There's got to be a couple of words added. How can we afford this? And it's not like, how can we afford this? It's, what do we need to do so we can afford this? What do we need to do so we can make this happen? In fact, that should be the words out of your treasurer's mouth, out of your financial secretary's mouth. It should never be, we can't, or our budget doesn't. It should be, what do we need to do to make this ministry happen? That's their job, to help make that happen.
Well, and let's talk about the finance committee. The finance committee isn't there to tell you what you can't do, just like what you're saying, but they're the ones who are raising the funds. And so we blame the minister all the time, and that's another subject that we can talk about, and we have talked about in other episodes.
I don't touch on it this week.
Well, okay. So, and the finance committee, that you give them back the work. You all are responsible for raising that money and to making sure the money is there. So you come back and you tell us how that's going to happen. They're not the doorkeepers, they're the door openers.
There we are.
The ushers.
So there's the current situation in most churches. We don't talk about money, except for when we do the offering, and that's like uninspiring. And we're obsessed. Absolutely, the church is obsessed with money. We can't do it because our pastor's going to have to get cut and pay. I hear all that kind of stuff all the time.
Or God forbid that we talk about money at all. I mean, let's make sure that we touch that
sometimes,
again.
Sometimes we don't talk about it at all.
Which is probably why we just read that little old scripture and go on. That's how we don't talk about money. Okay, let's
talk about three solutions, okay? Because we do want to offer primarily solutions. I often say that any idiot can point out the problems, okay? It takes a leader to point out the solutions and to implement those solutions.
So we want to give that to you.
Let's offer you three. So number one is using storytelling as a catalyst for giving. Most of you, I can't think most of you, a lot of you have been to college, and you get those college fundraising letters from your alumnus on a fairly regular basis, a couple times a year. If you didn't do college, you get a World Vision flyer, or you've seen the commercials, or Christian Children Fund, or any of these nonprofits, and you get letters from them asking you to support them. Have you ever read through them? And if you haven't, it's time for you to start collecting them, because they are great examples of what churches don't do. Because when a church tends to send a letter, or when they talk about it from the pulpit, or when they talk about the offering, if they talk about, they're talking about, hey, our budget's down. We need more money. We're struggling. We're in the red. Never in any of those alumni fundraisers or nonprofit letters do you ever read that. Even if it's true, you don't read it. Instead, what do you hear?
What do you see?
And what do you see? You hear? Go ahead.
You hear about what your monies are doing, and you hear stories. I know I just got a piece from Agnes Scott College, my college, and it was, hey, here's how your giving has helped, and here's what we're going to be doing. And it's really awesome stuff.
And it had stories of individuals.
Right, individuals.
Hey,
that's what I'm saying.
So-and-so did this. She's gone on to do this. She's become the CEO of that. She's become they're doing things in Africa or Asia or whatever. And they're talking about the successes
Right.
based on the giving.
Okay, well, and now we're talking about print materials there, but I want to bring this home. You mentioned World Vision, and I had the opportunity to work at World Vision for 6 months as a temp before we moved here, and it was awesome. Whether or not you like World Vision, what they do and did there as an example for us today was awesome. Every Wednesday was chapel, and they shut down every department. Hundreds of employees got together in the chapel area for some worship, and they had a speaker every single week, and almost every time it was somebody who'd gone to visit one of the areas that we served, and they came back. They had pictures for us to look at, movies, and they had their stories. And my guess is the majority of people that worked at World Vision, regardless of if they made little money or a lot of money, they were giving back in some way. They heard those stories. And the other little piece is the best stewardship message I think I've ever heard, I've ever heard, was at a church where they had taken and said, we're going to build a little playground for our children. And the woman who chaired their children's ministry, not a staff member, got up there this one day and said, I'm just here to say thank you to you, and we're going to be dedicating the new play area after church today. I want to invite you. And they had a picture of what that playground looked like. It had a child on one of the pieces of equipment, and she said, really, this wouldn't be possible without your gifts and your prayers. I remember it all these years later. That's what it is. You're telling the story and you're thanking them. You're telling the story and linking it to their giving.
Here's the key, folks, is that you're offering meditation in your sermons. Everywhere you go, stories of transformed lives, stories of how your ministries are helping people. That's the key. People give to vision. Yeah. People give to results. Yeah. I'll never forget, and you can go read this, Cliff Christopher's book, Not Your Parents' Offering Plate. He talked about the story of a church doing a capital campaign, and the pastor had heard while Cliff was there that some guy in the church had given $2 million to, or maybe it was $1 million, whatever, a couple $1 million to his alumni association, and this guy knew that they were in the middle of this capital campaign, and he says, I don't understand why he didn't give it to us. And Cliff said, let's go ask. And so they did. They went up to ask the guy. They went to his house. He received them graciously. And they asked, why did you give it to your alumni association, not to church? And he said, because I know what my alumni association will accomplish with this money. I am not sure what my church would do. Yeah. Folks, we've got to talk consistently and constantly about the results of ministry, and that has to be out there all the time. I just, hang on. Go ahead. Every week, when I do my coaching with my Growing Church Network, my Church Growth Catalysts, I start the meeting, the coaching time, by saying, good. What wins have you had? Yeah. What have you accomplished? What's going on good in your church? And I remind them that most churches are depressed. And the reason they're depressed is because they never talk about the wins. And every church has wins. Your church, I don't care how small it is, I don't care how big it is, there are wins going on. There's ministries happening. And we have got to learn to celebrate those wins, as little as they are, because little wins become huge wins. And so that's storytelling, folks.
I was just thinking, I hope you do, and if not, I'm putting you on the spot, that you tell your network folk as they share their wins, to be asking them, how are you sharing that with your congregation? Yeah, that's right. We talk about it all the time. You've got to share these from the pulpit. You got to share these in your offering snooze, or instead of your offering snooze. Right. So here's a thought, as you were talking a few moments ago, that came to mind. It might behoove you to ask people when you're talking to them, members of your church who are being touched by your church, something along the lines of, what has Jesus done for you recently? Right? How has your life changed? How is your life changing? What's different about you today than it was last week?
Where have you seen Jesus moving in your life?
Right. Recently, though, you want to get it like in the last week, right? Or the last month.
Last month, anyway.
Because the follow-up question to that, if it's, nothing, is, what would you like him to do for you? Right. Because then you're gathering in this information. You're either getting stories to share. Hey, this is this is what we're doing, and you connect the dots, da 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 da.
People need the dots connected.
How would you, what would you want him to do? What do you need? And then one, you have a prayer opportunity, but two, you're thinking about, okay, what are we or aren't we doing and able to do?
All right, so storytelling is number one. I want to move into number two, and we're going to kind of hit this one and go. There's lots of materials out there on this, and that is, folks, you need to create a narrative budget. Especially if you're in a money-obsessed culture, you need to create a narrative budget. A narrative budget is the ways in which we bridge finance with faith, because a narrative budget talks about the ministries that the church is doing and how the money is funding it. Most churches, they deal with line item budgets, and they pass out the line item budgets twice a year or whatever, and every committee deals with their line items and what do we need, what do we want. And don't get me wrong, you have to have a line item budget because the accountants need it, your inner office needs it, but the average person in the pew doesn't need a line item budget. Right. They don't need to know the details of how many stamps you're budgeting this year. What they need to know is, how are we going to fund the ministries of the church? So you divide, a narrative budget is divided up by the ministries the church is doing. Worship, children, youth, seniors, the bus ministry, whatever your ministries are. You don't have utilities. You don't have the pastor's salary. Instead, what you do is you say, what percentage, let's do worship, what percentage of the pastor's time is spent preparing for worship, leading worship, etc.? That percentage is what goes into that section. So if the pastor makes $100,000, because it's easy to work with, $100,000, and they spend 40% of their time, then $40,000 is stuck into that budget. And then, of course, you got your worship leaders and all that. So in the end, your worship says the worship ministry here in this church costs the church $125,000. And the children's ministry has, and you divide utilities and all the rest.
You say more than that. You're saying more than that. I mean,
it's a narrative,
and worship,
it's stories.
Right, and worship, it's stories, but it's also saying to them, this includes our bulletins and blah, blah, blah. You're not doing line item. That's what they're doing. But you're letting them know this is what is included. You're going to disagree with me.
You don't.
But that, I do.
Okay, I've read a number of narrative budgets, and so have you, but I would disagree that you put bulletins and because you end up with a line item budget then. So
no, you don't. No, it's not bulletins, so much bulletins, but what you're trying to get to them, particularly if you're in a congregation that is so line item crazy, you just say this covers, and it lets them know what it covers.
Yeah,
okay, that's what I'm saying. Not bullet point or anything else. It's a story. It's a narrative.
And you divide the whole, again, everything that you do. So
that's right.
How much of the utilities are they responsible for? As I say, bulletins,
I wouldn't say
worship.
Even how much is. I mean, that's property. We care for a building that's.
You don't put a property ministry. You divide it up into there. You take the money that you spend in property, and you say how much percentage is here, how much percentage because you don't want to have a separate admin whatsoever.
Right. I do property, but I wouldn't be saying so much of it is for the lawn care. Again, it's a story. So you'd say, our property ministry includes snow removal, blah, 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 blah.
No, I don't agree, but that's okay. We can agree to disagree.
We're disagreeing.
Okay. So anyway, whatever your narrative budget has your ministries in there, and apparently the building, and what else? Building, and what else would go there? Would you do administration separate?
No, it has to be in your budget.
Would you do administration separately as in this narrative?
I wouldn't call it administration, but yeah, I would.
Okay, see, I'd divide all those and put them into just ministries.
Again,
but anyway,
if you're in a line item obsessed congregation or this, you got to. Anytime you introduce a change, you have where you want to go and where you are, and you've got to help them get to this point. So I would say, our administrative covers are this and are that and are that and they're this. And to be quite honest, you can put them up here already, but you're going to cover them down here as well.
Anyway, so the advantage of a narrative budget is that it removes the argument about how much you're spending here or there or whatever, and it also allows for and encourages, if you will, especially if you divide it all up evenly in ministries. When someone says, and you can encourage designated giving. I want to give my money to worship. Great, because you're still paying utility bills and the salary, the pastor's salary, and all the rest of it. So it works out really nicely for that. But like I said, you still have to have a line item budget for the back office because they need to know all that budget stuff. And you don't hide that from the congregation.
Nope.
You just don't make it readily available. If someone wants it, they have to come ask for it.
Exactly.
But and you don't hide back it, but you just don't say, okay, we got to move on.
We do. We're like
which
at
is
5
creating
minutes.
a culture of generosity. And creating a culture really is remembering that every word that comes out of your mouth, pastor and staff and church leaders, every word that comes out of your mouth either enhances or hinders your church's financial future.
Right.
And so keeping things positive and telling the stories and remembering and reminding people of what's going on good in the church and how their finances are helping the church to do the ministry, that helps create a culture. But let's talk some specifics like preaching.
So your preaching is around, again, it is about the stories. It is talking about money. I mean, you've got to have stewardship sermons in there, not just once a year, or for 4 concentrated weeks, because you're doing your finance, your stewardship drive. You're continually bringing home and weaving in generosity. I mean, really, it's not just about preaching stewardship. It is about generous. We have a generous God who has poured out his love and his grace upon us. What is our response?
Okay, so absolutely with and
you want to add? I can tell you're waiting to add.
And that is that Jesus talked more about money and wealth than any other topic besides the kingdom of God.
And
he
here
talked about
we
that
avoid
more,
it.
and we avoid it. And so, but what we often do is we do stewardship and generosity, generosity. Folks, people are struggling with money. People are afraid to talk about money. We need to talk about money like how to get out of debt.
Right.
And why debt is not okay.
Right.
We need to talk about work ethic. Paul talks about that a good bit. We need to talk about investing. Jesus talked about that in this parable of the talents. That's an investment plan. We need to talk about these things so that people understand their relationship with money and how to deal with money. And your sermons help inspire people to live differently. And, really, truly, we ought to be talking about money really often, not just once in a while, and not just about giving, tithing, and all that. Those are minor topics. If people have more money that's expendable, they'll give more to church, particularly if your church has helped them to experience that win of getting out of debt, of learning to manage their money or learning how to make more income.
Well, and you may remember this, and I think I've shared this in a previous episode. I remember so distinctly the night before Thanksgiving getting a phone call from one of my newer members. She'd been there for maybe a year or 2 years, and she said, Pastor Chris, I'm calling because I made the decision to tithe. And I don't know that I'm going to be able to do that. I've got to do these. But the Lord really has been moving in me and said, give me a try. And so I am going to try. And I just wanted to be accountable for that and let you know. And I was like, oh my gosh, but it's because I had been preaching about generosity, about what God can do, about our trust and whatnot. And she was willing to step up and trust. God had been working with her. Can we move on to
talk about offering meditations?
We've already talked about those.
But if you're not doing stories, if you're not doing inspiring pieces, if your elders or whoever is leading those, stop.
Right.
Just stop.
Right.
Reading scripture it goes over and over.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. There's nothing wrong with scripture, but people don't give out of obligation. They by and large don't give out of tithing because they're testing God. Yeah, okay, weave that in once in a while, like twice a year. But the rest of the time, talk about the stories. Talk about how their money is changing lives. People give to vision, and if you want to see an increase in your offering plate, then talk about how the church is doing incredible ministry and is worthy of their investment.
Well, if it worked to tell people what tithing is all the time, why they ought to be doing it, why they should be doing it,
the Bible
we're
says
yielding,
so.
blah, 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 we
wouldn't-
wouldn't have to be talking about
That's right.
it right
You wouldn't
now,
be on this
right?
call.
Okay,
So
let's
do
get
some changes.
Yeah, let me get the third piece in here about fostering a culture of generosity. And that is that every word that comes out of your mouth enhances or hinders your church's financial future. And that's, we forget that. We meet with people and we complain, or we kvetch, and this isn't happening, or whatever, or we listen and we can go the negative. But everything, what is your vision of your church? What is your mission of your church? Your finances, the stewardship, the generosity, the monies that are put in the plate or the bag or the box, whatever you're doing, or your bank through, your
E-giving.
Yeah, right. That money is dependent upon what you're doing. And how do they know what you're doing if you're not talking about it? Can I say one more? I want to say one more
then
thing.
wrap
I know
it up,
we
'cause
got to
we're out of
go.
time.
Right. And that is, Pastor, so many of us live in even below the poverty level. And a lot of us don't have money. That's an embarrassment for a lot of us. A lot of us have debt, and that's another bit of embarrassment for people. We're uncomfortable talking about money, or we grew up in ways that money wasn't talked about around us. And
Or we were trained badly.
Right, and a lot of you don't even know how to read your budget line. You've got to get, I'm not saying you got to get your finances straightened out or anything, although that's a really good thing. Yeah, but you've got to find the comfort way of doing that. And if you've got, you can go see a banker or somebody who can teach you about reading your financials. Go ahead and do that if you're afraid to do that with your finance chair, right? To out
Your
yourself,
denominational
so to speak.
official will be able to connect you with somebody if you're in a denomination.
Yeah, but a lot of us aren't talking about money because we're embarrassed about our own financial situation, and we got to get that reconciled. Okay, I'm done.
And while we're waiting to do that, do the rest of what we taught you. Hey, we're out of time.
And you give. I mean, I know we're out of time, but it is, stand up there, and even if it's $1 or you give once a month, put an empty envelope into that offering basket or
if
whatever.
it's being passed anymore.
Right, if they're being passed in your church, then you show them, you do it, and make sure that other people see it every single week. All right, now I'm done.
Hey, we're out of time. We'll see you next week.
Have a great week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.